Welcome to Season 3 of This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley, a podcast about the Bay Area, technology, and culture. I'm your host, Sunil Rajaraman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Yasha Kakis-Wolf.
So I've been thinking a lot about Seattle these days.
Seattle's a great place. In fact, it's where one of our second-time podcast guests is from.
This is kind of a new thing for us, though. We're coming back to people that have been on the show in the past, and we're having new and different kinds of conversations with them.
We had Kate Clark a few months back to try Phil's Coffee for the first time, and did a joint interview with her and Jacob Jabber, the CEO of Phil's, after an interesting Twitter thread ensued where Kate criticized Phil's.
And I think that as much as we would have loved to have turned Kate onto Phil's as coffee that's better than her hometown Starbucks, we didn't quite get there, but we liked her so much that we wanted to spend more time with her. And Sunil, you got to do that pretty recently.
She's really a terrific person and a tech reporter here in the Bay Area. So for our listeners, Kate Clark was a senior tech reporter for Techcrunch, where she covered startups and venture capital. And she recently switched jobs to The Information, which is a well-reputed technology publication here in the Bay Area, where she is also covering venture capital.
This is a pretty cool interview, Sunil. I was excited to listen to it, and I'm sure everybody else is going to enjoy it just as much as I did.
Really, really good. And we talk about some of her reporting around Lambda School, which is an interesting company doing things in the education space here in the Bay.
Enjoy.
Very excited to have you back again, Kate. You are now a two-time guest on This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley.
I am. Thanks for having me back.
Now, I remember your first visit to our podcast was what was the reason for that again?
I had tweeted something negative about Phil's Coffee, and a debate erupted on Twitter around whether Phil's was better than Starbucks, I think. So you had me on to talk to, I think it's Jacob Jabber of Phil's Coffee, the CEO.
And have you changed your mind about Phil's since your last visit?
I haven't had Phil's Coffee since I came on this podcast and tried it. I probably had Starbucks like 25 times in that time frame.
I am quite disappointed to hear that, but that's okay.
Again, I'm not saying Starbucks is the best coffee. I'm just saying it's sort of a habit, and Phil's just hasn't really done it for me just yet.
Okay, well, some other things have changed since you last visited us.
Mm-hmm.
You switched jobs.
I did, yeah. I'm 3 weeks in now in a new job. I joined The Information, which is a subscription-based publication that covers tech and business.
What's your response to a boomer who says, oh, those millennials switching jobs left and right?
My dad was quite concerned that I was switching jobs. It's my third job since I graduated college. But when a better opportunity comes your way, you should accept it, right?
Are you saying it's a better opportunity?
For me personally, it's definitely a better opportunity because I think I get more time to dive into, important issues in tech and venture capital and startups. And I have the ability to sort of take a little bit more time on each piece that I write.
No, and you came out, right out of the gate with a pretty strong piece. So let's just get right into it.
Yeah.
Can you explain to our listeners who may not be as familiar with what ISAs are, what they are, and what Lambda School is?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with Lambda School. Lambda School is it's a startup that sort of brands itself as a college substitute. And probably anyone listening's heard of coding academies. It's sort of these programs where you enroll for 6 months, maybe 2 years, and you take courses to learn how to be a software engineer, usually. There are other, skills you can learn, like Lambda School, which is a leading coding academy that is based in San Francisco and a graduate of Y Combinator, raised a bunch of money in the past. You can learn to be an engineer there. You can learn UX design, and they have a couple of other pathways for people to learn things and to get jobs that ideally are paying you a lot more than what you would enrolled in Lambda School making, which a lot of people obviously don't have jobs when they enroll.
And how do they make money?
So income share agreements, which you mentioned, ISAs, they actually have students sign these agreements, and they will get a future portion of that student's income. So once a student is making $50,000 as an engineer, at least $50,000, Lambda School will get, I think it's 17% of their monthly salary.
That sounds like a lot. I mean, is that?
Yeah.
I've heard about these models before. I mean, like, what's just your overall perspective on this type of model for any profession?
Yeah, so the income share agreement model is growing in popularity. There are other universities, accredited universities, that are experimenting with it because the student loan crisis is massive. So I think, there is absolutely nothing wrong with experimenting with these new models of financing education. I think actually it's a great thing. It's just it's new, and so it's new in the sense that for-profit schools are dabbling with it in a way that hasn't really been a thing. So, with new things like this, there's always going to be these trial periods where they figure out what's appropriate. Taking 17% of a person's monthly salary when they're making 50 grand is actually quite a lot of money, especially because it's pre-tax dollars that they're taking.
It seems like a lot. And I mean, is this really the way to eliminate the student debt problem? I mean, I'm just curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't know. I think, obviously I don't have the answers to that, but I think startups that are dabbling with education, technology, or ed tech, as people like to call it, I mean, it seems like a great thing. We have a lot of venture capital dollars that go into like these consumer technology businesses that are, they're not particularly meaningful, whatever that might mean to any individual person. But ed tech kind of has this, is a bit more meaningful, and there's more impact that can be made, I think. So I like to see startups there. The thing about Lambda School, which I wrote about in the story, is that a lot of students that are in it actually feel like it's not high quality. And so they're really upset with the fact that they sign these income share agreements. Some of them even feel like they don't totally understand what those agreements are until they've kind of are already in the program. And then they're like, well, I don't think that I'm learning anything, and I have to give you a percent of my salary for, a few years.
Yeah, this seems like a monumental shift in just how you think about the model. And it really is contingent upon the quality of job that you receive on the other end, and to some extent, the quality of education. One thing I often wonder about is, are these schools building skills that are usable not just for a near-term gain in income, but for the long run? And I don't know if you've developed a perspective on that.
Yeah, I think the one question I would like answered too is, I'd like to talk to a bunch of managers of people who are working with fellow Lambda School students and get their take on how well they're how good, I guess, of coders they are. Because, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that might be really telling of actually how effective these coding schools are. And it's not just Lambda School. There are several of these. There's Holperton School, which is very similar, except that it's in person and not remote, which Lambda School is fully remote, which, some people think fully remote education doesn't work too. So there's a lot of factors at play here.
One thing, and it's hard to talk about Lambda without talking about its CEO, Austin. And he is, a pretty vocal member of the tech community on Twitter and elsewhere. We actually had him booked for the show, but he had to reschedule. This was a few months ago. Tell us about Austin. Like, what is he like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know him personally. I spoke to him for the story, but Austin Allred, I would say in a lot of ways, he's kind of a quintessential Silicon Valley idealistic CEO. Like, he's very good at selling his vision, and that's really important if you are venture backed, I think, because one way to get really good investors on board with a company when it's really nothing is to have a really grand vision and to be able to sell it effectively. So he can do that. And if you look up, interviews he's done, you'll see that he's really good at that. So I think, he's really sold a lot of people on this, and he has a lot of fans, which is really interesting to me. And he was a really interesting sort of character to me because he has such a following, though, his business is not particularly large yet. I mean, they're valued at like 150 million. They have ambitions of, I think, a higher valuation, according to some investors. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is a very small business, and they probably have. They're not profitable, of course, and they have probably little to show in terms of money really coming in. So it's fascinating to see such a audience for someone like that, and I think it really has to do with the fact that he's learned, or he's just naturally gifted at selling his vision and kind of like attracting people to him. And it's interesting.
I almost view that as like a credit to him in a way. I mean, there's this. No such thing as bad publicity thing. And there was, of course, like a big Twitter debate that erupted, I think, several weeks ago. I remember this. It was like on Christmas Day, around how much should you, it was funny because it was on Christmas Day and everybody was debating or, whether you should work, X number of hours a week, if that's correlated to success. Of course, my view on that is it depends on the job.
Right.
But what did you follow that whole thing, and what was that all about?
Was the debate over how many hours you should work?
Yeah. This was I think it was DHH and Austin, and there was this like big back and forth around.
So what was Austin's take? I didn't see it.
It was.
Was he? So one of them was pro like 80-hour work weeks, and one was con.
Yeah. Okay, essentially.
Yeah. I think I heard about this. I mean, I didn't see it, which I'm glad. I was not spending my Christmas engaging in Twitter debates like that. But I mean, that's just representative of what's happening online all the time in Silicon Valley, or whatever Silicon Valley means nowadays. People are constantly debating things like this. But I think if you can be somebody who's constantly in these debates and having all these hot takes, you do get a big following. So it, like you said, it can be a really effective way of branding. And a lot of the people I spoke to, whether that was in ed tech or not, they said that they were impressed with with Austin's ability to market his company. I think that he has he's really strong at that specifically. And that's been important for them, I think, because they're sort of the go-to coding school, at least in my circles.
Yeah, no, they've developed a good brand. I have a few friends who've invested, and even Adam Mosseri, the CEO of Instagram, who we had on the podcast, came on here and said that, we asked him what startups is he excited about, and Lambda was the only one he mentioned.
Really? Huh. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think because it's in the educational sector, people do feel like it can make a big impact, and people want that. I mean, you hear it all the time, how now employees of companies like Facebook want to leave because they want to work somewhere where they feel like it's mission driven. And Lambda School, it is mission driven, right? I mean, at least, on the outside, it seems like it is. So I can see why people are excited about it.
So speaking of like kind of being extreme and getting marketing and kind of, this just seems to be a recurring theme in our entire society right now. And one place where we see it more, or maybe I'm perceiving this wrong, correct me, but is just in the relationship between technology companies and the press that covers technology companies. Does the press hate tech companies? Can you just explain?
No, I mean, it's such a misconception. I remember once I was on a panel with Erin Griffith, who's a reporter at the New York Times, and somebody asked something like that, and she was like, I love startups. Like, I love innovation. I think all the tech reporters that I know are extremely excited about technology, and they're interested in it. And like, I'm interested in venture capital and things that a lot of people don't, pay attention to. So no, I mean, certainly I don't know any reporters that are like, I hate tech companies. Absolutely not. But I mean, I think our jobs are to sort of bring some transparency to them. And the thing is, startups and larger technology companies are very happy to publish or talk about positive things, but they're not going to talk about negative things. So that's why you might see outsized coverage of negatives, seemingly negative news. And I think that's why journalists are sort of accused of hating tech companies, because they have to bring negative things to light.
I share a similar take. So, I mean, I think just my opinion on this, and I don't know if it's, well informed from your perspective or not, but I think that the press probably feels like they missed the opportunity to hold, in the early days, companies like Facebook and Uber accountable, and then it ended up just ballooning into bad problems, and now the pendulum has swung on the other side. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, there could be some truth to that. I mean, I haven't been a reporter long enough to really have enough context or historical context, but I do think that people are seeing, or journalists have seen how Facebook played out. And now when we look at companies that are like Lambda School, $150 million valuation, 100 employees, not that big, we're thinking about in 2 years when it's suddenly a $5 billion company, and then in 7 years when it's Facebook. Like, so now I think we are thinking about the startup and company life cycle, and we know what a company can become. And so maybe there's some of that, but I don't really know.
What is the mindset that you're in when you write a story like the Lambda School story, or really any story? Yeah. And so you kind of gave us a little bit of insight there, but are there any common questions that you're thinking about asking, like sort of any company across the board? And I mean a little deeper than, oh yeah, what's the value of this company? How fast is it growing? Like, what are just the questions that go through your head as a reporter?
Well, for me, I think because I'm a venture capital reporter and I'm so focused on money, I usually, it's like, take a step back and and ask the company, what are they trying to do? Like if with Lambda School, I thought that they were trying to raise money. You know, he said they actually turned down money and they don't want to raise additional capital unless they have to. So we'll see how that plays out. But, you know, I wanted to know from Austin, like, what do you want to do with it? What's next? Because like they've said various things in the past, like they wanted to launch a cybersecurity and nursing program, which is kind of far-fetched, but, you know, could happen if they had $100 million at their disposal. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just finding out what they're trying to do and getting past the very press-appropriate jargon that they might try to use, or, you know, whatever they've been sort of like versed on from their
It sounds like you're essentially being a bullshit filter.
Yeah. I mean, you are, right? You're trying, and it's hard because sometimes you get like 45, and this is not about Lambda School, but sometimes you get like 45 minutes of just complete bullshit and you're like left with nothing. And you're like, well, then you just have to move on to somebody else.
You know, one of the things that I've struggled with in this podcast, and we've had a few CEOs on, a few VCs on, and they've been great. We've been fortunate for these guys, but when you talk to people for, you know, a few, there's this problem with being transparent, particularly with business CEOs and VCs. They are some of the most press trained people you'll ever encounter. And how do you crack that? Like, how do you get a layer deeper and get information that's useful?
I mean, I'm still learning. I think one strategy is to continue asking the same question in different words. You know, I'm not, if you're interviewing somebody on tape and you want it to be interesting, that's harder because then you can't just keep asking them something. But if you're on a phone call with somebody and you're trying to write a story, you could just keep sort of like jabbing them until they give you something. But, you know, it's true. PR or VCs are very well, they are really well press trained, and they are not incentivized to tell you things because why would they be? So I think it's particularly challenging because if you're a reporter in like politics or in a lot of these other local news, you know, you're talking to normal people, man on the street, a woman on the street. But when you're sort of a venture capital reporter, you're talking to venture capitalists constantly every day, and they don't really want to tell you things. So it's tough.
How do you approach a situation where, and actually, maybe I'll ask, have you ever encountered a situation where you suspected maybe you got a tip from a VC to, you know, hurt another company's round or any situation like that? Have there been cases like that?
Absolutely, yes, all the time. That is extremely common. Yes.
Extremely common.
Everybody is motivated by different things. So whenever you get a tip from somebody in the industry like that, you just have to report it fully because you just have no idea where it could be coming from. And it doesn't mean it's not true, but that definitely happens.
Wow, that's like very Machiavellian. And so do they, you know, like, do you just oftentimes run into a situation where they're trying to like use you as a tool to push their propaganda?
Yeah. I mean, I've only been at the information a very short time, so I don't know if it will change because the nature of the publications are so different. But being at Techcrunch, I definitely felt people try to use me as a pawn for various things. It's just something you have to learn your way around. And I found like moving to San Francisco from Seattle, the culture is very like transactional, and you just kind of have to get used to it.
Has anyone ever attempted to intimidate you into not publishing something?
No, I mean, people just get angry, but I don't know if it's, I don't see that as intimidation because it's just kind of like an emotional reaction. I feel like intimidation is more like calmly being like, but I'll, you know, so no, I haven't really had that, luckily.
Yeah. But you know, you're early in your reporting career. Yeah. Who knows what might happen. What's the most surprising thing that you've learned so far being a tech reporter in San Francisco?
Well, maybe just in my career as a tech reporter, just in general, that so few companies are profitable and they all burn through so much money. I think people who don't work in tech like just assume all of these companies, whether it's like DoorDash or Uber or like Pinterest, all these like big former tech startups, they just assume they're these money making machines, but they're pretty much the opposite. I think that was a really interesting thing for me to learn. And
you know, like it's hard to talk about several of those companies without talking about Softbank, which is one of the more prominent investors now in tech. And I don't think I've seen this in the past 10 years where they've almost reached the status where, you know, receiving money from them has turned into almost like a negative branding event.
Isn't that crazy?
What's going on there? Like, what's your analysis of SoftBank and these massive rounds and their brand?
Yeah, it's only been a few years since the Vision Fund became a thing, and I don't know, in such a short time, like you just mentioned, it's gone from being this like, wow, SoftBank money in this company, SoftBank money in that company, to being like those companies kind of being ashamed. I think we actually just recently reported, I think last week, this company called GoPuff, SoftBank invested $750 million in them, and it never was announced by anyone. And who knows why, but it could be because that company didn't want the negative press associated with it. It's almost like they're doomed if they get money there. But I think we're seeing SoftBank is now, I feel like, trying to strategize and sort of figuring out how they can reverse some of the damage they've done, because they did make a number of investments which I think everyone sort of agrees were not the smartest and didn't really have the network effects that you usually make for really successful investments.
Do you think that ultimately, like, just playing this out 10 years from now, and I know that, like, let's say we record this again in 10 years, does the SoftBank Vision Fund return positively for investors?
For the first fund, yeah.
For the first fund, what about like what investments do you think that? Maybe asking a different way, are there any SoftBank investments you look at and think, wow, this is a good one?
That's a good question. I feel like there is more attention paid to some of the ones where you're like, why did they do that? Like WAG or Brandless, which were very new companies, and they gave them just tons of capital. But I think there's some Latin American companies in their portfolio that seem to be doing okay. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head whether that's even right, but I think they're in like Rappi, which is I think on-demand delivery. I could be wrong, so don't.
No, don't
fact
worry.
check
We don't fact check here. I heard that line from Michael Rappaport from his podcast. He's a great podcaster. Interesting on how I think there was more reporting done today by your old colleague Alex Wilhelm at Techcrunch about this very subject, and just kind of looking at, there was a possible Uber DoorDash.
Actually, that was, I think the Financial Times reported it, and then he probably So they reported that 6 months ago there was talks between DoorDash and Uber of a merger. The thing about those kind of deals is like that those are happening all the time. So you never. I mean, I don't know how much reporting they did, but you never know how far those talks went. You never know if it was like one drink at a bar, or was it like the contract was written. And I don't actually know what the details of that story were, but people were definitely talking about it today, and I had a few conversations about it. And it's one of those things where like most reporters in the space were like, oh yeah, like I'd heard about that. I didn't dig into it, but I heard of it. So it's certainly something people had been talking about, but interesting to see the story come out.
And if that rumor is flying around, I mean, it's got to be destabilizing for DoorDash employees, but I think about a company like Postmates, and I think, how do they survive? And like, so, that particular space, so much capital has gone into it. I know it's not a space that you, maybe you've covered before.
Yeah, some.
What's going to happen there?
I'm glad you brought up Postmates, because I feel like, so Postmates was filed to go public, was going to go public in like November, just October. I don't know. It's been a couple months. And then they delayed their IPO, and then now it's crickets. So what's going on? There were rumors that DoorDash was going to acquire Postmates. So, another set of like rumors of the same sort of category.
I even heard that one.
Yeah. And I don't know what happened. I interviewed the CEO of Postmates at Techcrunch Disrupt, and I asked him about it, and he said, that's not true or whatever. Something along those lines. And I'm really wondering what they're going to do, because I think they're in a bad spot. 2019 IPOs were not great for these consumer tech companies, as we all know. Postmates is, it's not a proven business model. It's not any of the good enterprise tech that all the Wall Street people want. I don't know. I think I am very curious to see what they'll do, and I'm sure they're concerned about what's next.
If I'm a listener outside of Silicon Valley, anyway, we have a lot of those. What companies should I be thinking about right now that are going to affect my life? Like my day-to-day life. What are there any that stand out to you that, whoa, holy shit, these are going to be big?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of activity at fintech, and I think it seems to me, based off my friends who aren't in tech, that a lot companies in that space seem to kind of cross over. And I'm thinking of like Robinhood as an example. That's a company that I have a lot of friends who are familiar with, and I am also, because it's this very valuable unicorn, whatever. So I think we'll see more growth there. There's companies like Stash and Chime, and there's a bunch of these sort of like investment apps that I think are getting a lot, they're making a lot of progress. They're growing quickly. So I'm guessing those are ones will probably be there. And then also I think one space I'm interested in exploring, but I know nothing about, is clean tech, or like climate tech, or whatever you want to call it, things that are good for the environment. I've noticed some buzz around that space in the sort of San Francisco VC community. So I'm thinking maybe that we'll see, I don't know if we'll see more investment, but we might see more talk, and then that might lead to more investment. So then those could obviously be really impactful for everyone in the entire world.
Yeah, I mean, definitely feels like, I mean, I've heard of more companies working on climate tech stuff as well. Great. I guess, what are some things that you would share for people who are outside of the Valley that are common, I don't know, myths that, and stereotypes that you see in like pop culture that are just not true, or that you would confirm are true?
The thing is, like, they're so true. I feel like the stereotypes are so true about Silicon Valley. Like, that's why I mentioned to you before we recorded that book, Uncanny Valley. She talks about, which I recommend, she talks about so many of these things that we kind of see as stereotypes, but like she lived in the startup world, and she worked at a startup, and they're all true. And I think, a lot of, I think about the fact that it's still very male dominated is true. The fact that people wear Patagonia vests all the time, it's true. Like, a lot of these things. And the fact that people speak in jargon, and that they hyper network and like send GCal invites to their friends for like hanging out. Like, all these things are very true.
Much of it is true. I completely agree. You mentioned the Uncanny Valley. Yeah. Are there any other, books that you're reading right now that you'd recommend to people to demystify this place, or just about this place in general, or authors that you follow?
That's a good question. So I just read Uncanny Valley. That was really good. Just generally books about that. I think Reset by Ellen Pao is really great. That one came out like 2018, I think. But that's a really excellent book. And then all the ones I'm thinking of are like the ones about how it's not diverse at all. But Brotopia is also really good. I'm trying to think about, like, I know a lot of people read like Peter Thiel's book and all these, and like, what's the LinkedIn founder?
Reid Hoffman.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I don't read the books that are like how to scale. I think it's more interesting to read about the culture.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like reading business books in general. I prefer like the HBR articles. It just gives me like a quick summary.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of Medium posts for any of the, if you're looking for tips on how to grow your business. But like, if you're looking for perspective into what it's like to live here, I mean, I'm obviously drawn to the like female perspectives, and there's a lot of great books like that. But I'm sure there's plenty from the male perspective as well, if that's what you want.
Who do you who are your role models in tech reporting or journalism in general?
I mean, there are so many great reporters at The Information, like Amir and Tom Doughton, and like just Corey. All the people I work with, they're so impressive. And then beyond, like I think Mike Isaac, who I mentioned, and Aaron at the New York Times are really great. I mean, people who work at the New York Times, of course, very admirable position to be in. They obviously worked their way there. I think like it's a space with a ton of really great reporters, and there's so many new publications cropping up too. Like it's crazy how many jobs there are and how much growth there's been in like tech reporting. So I'm excited that that's where I landed, because it seems like it's a good place to be.
You cover venture capital, but if you were a venture capitalist, I won't put you on the spot and make you name a specific company. But is there a space that you would invest in heavily right now?
Well, if I was thinking about purely returns, I would only invest in enterprise tech. I would invest in like SaaS, and I would invest in like DevSumer and productivity, even though I'm not passionate about it at all. But if I was only thinking about money, if I was thinking about like fun, I would invest in consumer tech, and I would invest in things that normal people on the street interact with, because that seems a lot more exciting. But I don't know if there's as much money there.
And are there any consumer companies that we mentioned the ones that seem like they're not doing so well, but are there any that you're kind of like, okay, I mean, so Robinhood, you mentioned that. But are there any others where you're like, okay, consumers should really be aware of this?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of the ones right now are kind of going through a lot of growing pains, where it's like these delivery apps, or they were so subsidized by venture capital dollars, and now like they're getting to the point where they need to show some sort of profit, and they can't. So I can't even think of one off the top of my head. Can you think of a good one?
Consumer apps that I'm excited about, or just consumer tech that I'm excited about. Yeah, I just haven't felt that feeling in a while.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange? Like there isn't something that I open up and I think, wow, this is magical, and it feels great. It all felt so new when mobile was out and like all this great stuff. Now it just feels like everything is there's like a lot of D2C brands and stuff like that.
There are a lot of D2C brands. There are definitely too many D2C brands. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on at like social media kind of. There's a reporter at The Information who covers that really closely, and he's got some really interesting pieces about it. Like the TikTok era, there was just that new TikTok app Byte that launched, and everyone was talking about it. So there's that stuff is fun, and that's why I say I would be interested in it, because it's fun. It's not like enterprise SaaS, which is inherently boring. But
it is. I've worked for a couple of those, but yeah, I completely agree. Couple final questions for you, Kate.
Mm-hmm.
You've tweeted about this before, but are there too many podcasts right now?
Yeah. I mean, there's not too many podcasts, because if there are people listening, then I think it's great. There are just so many. I was just thinking about this though. Like it's very fun to podcast, but even if you don't have an audience, I think that's why so many people do it. But there seems we're in a podcast bubble, but I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, there are a lot of podcasts out there. There are a lot of people who shouldn't be podcasting. I won't name names. Maybe they would say that I shouldn't be podcasting, but here I am sitting in a room with you. The last question I had was more related to just there just seems to be rumblings and early signs that companies are laying off more, and we're just whether it's in the on-demand space, et cetera. What's going to happen? Like, are we headed for a downturn, or is this just kind of a false alarm?
I'm always the one asking people that. I was just looking at some data that showed that actually like layoffs have been steady. So maybe it feels like there are more, but perhaps there actually aren't. I think the whole venture capital startup tech world is very cyclical. So naturally we will. I have no idea when. I mean, smart people say maybe this year, and some other smart people say maybe in 3 years. So it will come, but I don't think it's imminent.
It just feels like, oh my gosh. I mean, there's just so much geopolitical uncertainty. I mean, we were almost at, I can't believe that, the year just started a few weeks ago and we almost went to war in the Middle East.
Now there's an outbreak. Yeah.
There's a potential pandemic. Kobe Bryant died.
It's been I think just pretty much immediately. I mean, the crash in Iran, like the first day of the year, like it's certainly not going to be any, and now we're in election year. Like this is going to be just as an eventful year as 2019 was, if not more.
You just switched jobs, but I have to ask you, is this what you want to do for the rest of your life?
That's a good question. I hope so. Yes. I mean, I do want to. I think it's a hard career to switch out of. I think like once you're a reporter, you just you develop these skill sets and this sort of way of thinking about the world, and it'd be really hard for me to turn that off and stop doing that.
Well, I mean, we all know a few journalists who've switched to the other side and gone to the VC side. If you get a gigantic offer from Benchmark and Sequoia or all these other firms, you're not gonna switch teams
to be their next general partner, to be their youngest ever general partner. No, no, that feels like such a conflict of interest to do that. I mean, yes, it does happen, and nothing against it. I totally understand that people, some people are passionate about technology, and then some people are more passionate about journalism. And I'm definitely someone who is more passionate about journalism. Like I never had any ambitions of being a tech reporter. It's just kind of like where my career took me. So I guess I'm trying to say is my interest in journalism comes first, and then my interest in tech comes second.
Any shout outs to your former colleagues at Techcrunch? Any last sayings for them?
Yeah, I mean, I miss working with Megan Rose Dickey. She was like my best friend at Techcrunch, and I miss seeing her on an everyday basis. And Alex. I mean, Alex Wilhelm and I only overlapped by like a week because he had been at Crunchbase. He came back to Techcrunch, and then I quit. So we only had a short overlap. So I miss, but I miss doing the podcast because we had our equity podcast together, and I definitely miss that.
Are we going to see another Kate Clark podcast?
It's very possible. I'm thinking about it. I don't know. There's a lot of factors at play, but I'm definitely thinking about like what would be an interesting podcast. I don't want to just do another like Kate interviews VCs. So I got to think about it for a while.
I tried to convince Kate to do a podcast with me on more than one occasion. But
one day when we both have more free time.
Yeah.
When we're retired.
Well, I mean, let's find, like, you're supposed to find out which company that we need to invest in to make that happen. I mean, you get all this insider info, right? I mean, like, come on, use some of these VC tips and help us make a profit from it.
Definitely, that is a conflict of interest as well, but
Okay, all right, well, not for me. Okay, well, Kate, thank you so much for joining us for a second time. And we're excited to follow your career and your reporting at The Information. What's your Twitter handle again? Kate Clark Tweets.
Yep. Exactly.
All right, I got it.
It's
Okay.
an easy one to remember.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I got to say that prior to listening to the two of you, I really believed that, like, as much as I wanted a journalist to be pure in their focus, that they had some sort of a narrative that they were just trying to fill in the blanks for. And I think you both helped dispel that for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting environment out there with a lot of mistrust for companies and their various roles in, destroying various aspects of democracy. We cover that in numerous other episodes of the pod. You should probably listen to those. But it was really, really interesting hearing how Kate approaches technology reporting.
I really like this format. I mean, I recognize that wasn't all three of us in the conversation, but I really enjoyed it. And for you, dear listener, if you liked this episode, we would love to hear feedback from you, because we may be able to do many more podcasts if the two of us go off and do interviews with important people from the Bay Area one-on-one, and then come back together and have a chance to talk about it.
And we got feedback recently that Yasha needs to stop trailing off in sentences. And so I just want you to know that feedback is heard.
It's heard. What kind of feedback did you get, Sunil?
That I'm not loud enough sometimes.
Which is shocking to me, because I feel like you're the loudest person that I know.
I know, and so it hurt to hear that feedback. But shout out to Lakshmi, who gave that feedback.
Lakshmi, thank you. I'm not going to trail anymore. Sunil's going to be louder. But most importantly, if you loved listening to this podcast as much as I love giving Sunil feedback, please rate it 5 stars. Leave us a comment. It helps more people find the podcast.
Thank you.